Welcome to the SketchUp for School lesson. This is Design Your Dream Home, Part 3, Prep the Model to Print. This lesson will go over how to take the model created from Part 2 in this series and flatten it in a way that we can then print it to create a paper cutout model. So do not worry if you made changes to your own model in Part 2 or you added more elements from the 3D warehouse to personalize it. It is best to use the training file that is accompanied with this video. First, in order to understand what we're doing, we need to see what the end goal looks like in SketchUp. By doing a quick Google search of paper models cutout, you can see in this image search of various different ways in which you can take a 3D model and flatten it to then put it back together as a paper cutout. What's interesting in creating models like this is you need tabs to join walls and surfaces together to one another. So the challenge we have is to take our existing model and flatten it in a way that we can then print it out to then refold it with tabs and connections to then glue it together as a physical model. So let's get started by first looking at our existing model. The first thing we can do is simply make a copy of the existing model. This way, if we make any errors in rotating or flattening the file, we always have the original to come back to. With the select tool, drag a window around the entire model to pre-select all the geometry. It's okay that the floor plan is selected below from Part 2. Because this is locked, it will not copy when we move it over. Click on the Move tool and press Control on a PC or Option on a Mac to toggle the copy feature. And let's copy this over and scroll out and just bring this over somewhere in the model space. And we'll click to set it in place. We can now pan the model over a little bit and zoom in to now our copied model. Our next task is in grouping each facade as a separate piece. So we want to think of the model as a packaging box in reverse. So if you imagine a cardboard box, right, that's not a cube or a box first, that gets folded and is flattened. We're kind of reverse engineering this. So we want to take all these pieces and determine where we want to create folds and where we want to keep parts flattened. Every model will be slightly different, and it takes some trial and error when you're doing this. Let's think of each wall as a separate group. So this one we'll say is 1, this section is 2, this one is 3, this one here is 4, and then the back side is 5, and this last one is 6. So we essentially have 6 panels that we need to flatten out to then be able to put back together. So let's first group section 1, which is the easiest one, which is the wall and the 2 windows. With the select tool, double click on the face and then hold down Shift and then single click on each individual window component. Be careful not to double click on the window components because that will actually open up the component. So it's a double click on the face and then a single click on the components. And again, making sure Shift is held down. With that selected, right click and make that a group. So we're essentially just isolating this as its own piece. That way, when we need to move and rotate it, it's all together and connected. So we'll eventually take this and fold it down to reverse engineer it. Let's do the same thing with wall 2 here, which is double clicking on the roof surface, holding down Shift, double clicking on the wall, and then single clicking on the sliding door. Again, making sure Shift is held down. Let go of Shift and right click and make that a group. That is just this section here. Wall 3, the same idea. We will double click on the top surface, hold down Shift, double click on the wall with Shift held down, and then single click on our window and door component. Right click again, make that a group, and continue around. So we'll orbit around to this side, double click, hold down Shift, single click, right click and make a group. Orbit around to the backside, double click, hold down Shift, double click, single click, right click, make group. And last but not least, double click, hold down Shift, double click, and then single click. Right click one last time and make that a group. Let's orbit around back to the front of the house to reorient ourselves to the model. In order to print the building, we need to align the roof planes so that they're parallel with the wall surface. So we're essentially reversing the fold angle that we used to create it. And that way, in a sense, we're flattening it. So let's first edit wall number 2, which is this one here, by taking the select tool and double clicking inside of that group. Double click again on the roof surface. That way it's pre-selected. Next, in the modification tools over here, go ahead and click and activate the rotate tool. Be careful where we rotate from. We want to make sure we move the cursor right here, but that we're also rotating in the green. So I can press and release the left arrow key on our keyboard to lock in the green axis, so that now I can single click right here to start my rotation. I can click along the edge here to set my 0 reference point, move the cursor to the right, and you'll start to feel it dial in to place. And because we used 30 degrees as our angle, we can actually rotate this up. You can see to bring it back to 90, the rotation amount would be actually 60 degrees because the pitch is 30 plus the 60 here would equal 90. You can also just feel it dial in as well. So then click to set that in place. Now, this takes some practice, so feel free to undo if you mess this up. Also, don't hesitate to use the tape measure. So I'll click on the protractor here and then click back on the tape measure. And what you can do as a reference is on this edge here, double click to draw a guide right at that point. That can be used so that when you rotate this along the green, as I rotate this, you can actually feel it more easily snap to that vertical point. Once you're done with that guide, then you can just take the eraser and erase that guideline. Now let's repeat this for the other groups that have roofs in the model. So we'll take the select tool, we'll click outside of the group, we'll orbit around to this side here and double click inside of our third wall group. Double click on the roof surface with the select tool, click on the rotate tool, and then find not the green axis, but this time the red axis. Click and release at the center point here to start our rotation. Click again for our 0 reference and move our cursor up. Find that 60 degrees. You can also see my guideline of the rotation is actually aligning to the vertical wall as well. That's a good indication as well. Click to set it in place. Don't worry if our existing building and roof is overlapping the previous group. That's going to be intentional. We're then going to have to separate the building into 2 separate pieces in order to create that connection. So take the select tool, close out of that group, orbit around to the other side, and double click inside of group 5. Double click on the roof surface, click on the rotate tool, find the red axis, click once, click again, move the cursor up, and click one more time. Press the select tool to click outside of the group to close it, and orbit around all the way to this side here. And we'll do our last roof rotation by double clicking to enter the group, double clicking again, clicking rotate, finding the green axis, click once, twice, move the cursor up, and click again. This exercise will definitely get you more comfortable with rotating objects. So if you haven't rotated objects before, just note that always making sure you set your points, your 1, 2, and 3 will be really helpful. I'll take the select tool and click outside of the group. And now I can see our little bento box or our little cardboard box sort of open. Because the building has 2 sections, so it has sort of the main living space and then the bedrooms off to the left here, we need to separate them into 2 areas of the model and then unfold those groups down and around that ground plane. So this is going to allow us to actually keep the ground as a surface that we're going to fold from. You could alternatively not print out the floor, and that could make it easier to physically put back together, but that's really going to depend on how complicated your model is. And as you explore other models in which you're going to unfold, remember you can be creative in how you want to put it back together. For this particular model, because of these 2 overlapping pieces here, we can't physically print this out as one page or one piece. We have to separate it. So with the select tool, single click on the back section here, hold down Shift and select this piece. And one more time, select this front element. With the move tool, just simply click and move this off to some other arbitrary spot in the model. So it can just be kind of over here, just kind of far enough away so that when you fold this down, it's not going to touch anything else. Now we want to be able to take those 2 sections and fold them completely down so that we can create these little printouts. So let's focus on group 1 first. Taking the first wall here, let's click on the rotate tool and rotate this down from the ground point right here. But make sure we're not in the green. We want to be in the red. So we'll click and release again, and then flatten this down and click. We'll take the select tool, we'll click on this piece here, and we'll do the same type of rotation. This time pressing the left arrow key to lock in the green, click and release to start the rotation, click and release for the second click, move the cursor down, making sure we're at 90 degrees. So we could actually click once we see 90, or we can type in 90 and press enter. Select tool once more, pre-select this object here, click on the rotate tool, press the left arrow key to lock in the green, click for the center point, click for the top, bring the cursor down, and click again. Now let's do that again over here on our second part. Take the select tool, select this piece, and do the same type of rotation. This time in the red. And this one in the green, and the last one in the red as well. Now, as we look at the model, we'll see that the floor plan itself is still sort of sitting here, but realistically, we need to divide this so that we have it over here, and then we have it here, because we're sort of splicing it. And if we try to print this part of the floor, or this piece here, we would have that overlap. So we can't have that. So we have 2 options here. One, we could either splice it. The other is we could change the way that we want to fold this. So we could actually sort of pull this to here. So you could have your fold here and then maybe a tab here. But let's make the priority to be the floors being separated and just fanning out the walls. So let's take the line tool and draw a line from this point here down to this point here. We can also mimic that same line, which would be from here to here. Now, if we take the eraser, we can erase this edge, this edge, this edge, this edge, and this line edge as well. We're really close to getting this to be able to print. The challenge we have right now, though, is we're seeing the inside of the box. We need to actually look upside down. And one way that we could do that is we could take the navigational tools and we could try to orbit and sort of look upside down at the model and align to the view. But if we orbit and navigate, we're not looking at it truly as a 2D image. What we want to be able to do is quickly toggle a bottom view. And we can do that by clicking the Search SketchUp toolbar and typing bottom and then clicking bottom view. Once you enable this view, make sure you don't orbit, because the moment you orbit, you lose that view. So if that happens, click back up on the search, type in bottom, and then click to set it. Another way that you can keep this view is simply by creating a scene. In the scene manager, hit the plus sign located right here to add a scene. It'll create a scene. In this case, it's calling it scene 3. You can double click in there and you can call this bottom view and then hit return. Or you can also name this for the print that you want, which this would be a nice 1-page print. However, for this training, let's actually create this so that we are doing 2 separate pages for the printout. One for this section and another for this section. So what we can do is we can pan the screen over and we can zoom in closer on just the one section. And then with our scenes, we can hit the plus sign to add a scene. We can call this print A and hit return. And then we can pan down and over to our other section and add that as a scene and call that print B. The naming doesn't really matter that much. It's whatever you need to know and remember to recall it later. So as you make changes to this or adjust it, let's say maybe I orbit and navigate around, I can always double click back on the scene tab to get back to the camera position, whether it's this one, the single page one. I could even go back to my last exported image, which is of the original model here. I'm going to click back on the print A scene here. Now we could simply go and print the 2 pages here using the settings that we have right now. However, we want to do one last bit of planning. If you recall the previous image that I showed here, you'll see a lot of these printheads have these extra pieces of paper attached to them. And these you can refer to as a tab. This is a crease that you can bend along. That way it can connect the adjacent surface to it. You need these tabs either in the SketchUp model or in the cutout print that you do. I'll show you in the SketchUp model how we can create those tabs to help us, but just note that if you mess it up, that's okay. You can always add more or cut them away when you're actually putting this together physically. So the size of a tab doesn't matter all that much. It just needs to be big enough so that we can physically hold and so that it has enough dimension to it so that it can glue to the adjacent piece. Based off of the size and proportions of this building, we could probably draw a tab that's about 24 inches deep. Where we place the tabs is really based on how we want to reconstruct this. And if we focus on just this section here, we need some kind of tab that's going to connect, for example, this edge to this edge. And then this edge here of the roof is connected to this edge here. Here needs to crease to here. And then here needs to crease to here. So a simple way that we can do this is really just stack all of our tabs in one location to make it easier to cut later. So if we take the rotated rectangle tool, which is located under the rectangle tool, and then clicking on the rotated rectangle tool, I'm going to click and release starting here, click again at this endpoint here, and then I'm going to move my cursor out, typing in 2, 4, and then pressing enter. That's going to create that 24-inch tab that we need here. I'll scroll into this particular surface, and we can hide our scene manager as well here. And I'm just going to repeat the process. So click and release, move the cursor out. In this case, be careful on these angled ones. You want to make sure you're staying at that 0 angle. You don't want to have to draw this up or down. So make sure you're going along that dotted line. Once you have that, type in 24 and press enter. And let's keep going. Click and release, go along that red dotted line, type in 24 and press enter. Click and release, 24 and enter. The way that we can connect the other two, we'll first click and release here, pull this cursor out along that red again, type in 24 and press enter. We can do another one here, out 24, along the inside seam here, just in case. We can't do this inside seam because this would overlap the existing piece. So you could put it there, you would just have to cut it. We also need one going this way at 24 and pressing enter. Let's pan on over to our other section and we can repeat the process. So we'll do one that's on this tab here, one that's here, and here, and there as well. Be careful there. If I undo real quick, you'll see it actually created a surface over this group here. So if that happens for you, take the select tool and single click on that face that is created and press delete. You want to make sure you still see your materials and your textures that you placed here. Don't worry if the tabs are white or blue. That's irrelevant to what you need in the model. But if you want them to be consistent, you can always right click on a surface and reverse the face to get it back to the other direction. Now the other two tabs that we need are going to be one that's here and another one on this inside edge here. And as I mentioned previously, when in doubt, you can always manually add a tab when you physically print this out. This really can just be a lesson in itself, as the tabs are difficult to create and move, but they'll help you understand and calculate where you want to actually create these folds and cuts. With the tabs in place, we're ready to print our model out onto paper. Various paper sizes can be chosen, but for this lesson, I'll use a letter size, which is 8.5 inches by 11 inches. However, you can use whatever paper size you're able to print onto. To begin, let's go back to scenes. Click on the scenes panel over here, and let's single click first on our print A to bring that up on our page. The key here, because we're doing two separate prints, we want to make sure that the prints are each at the same scale. That way, when we put them together, it ensures that they'll line up and connect. So once we click on the scene, go up to the top menu and click print. Where it says print mode, current view, click and set print to scale. And I want to print to a specific scale that I can write down and jot. And then that way, if I use a ruler or an actual scale, I can measure from that in its physical dimension. So I'm going to scroll down and I want 1 inch in the drawing to equal 10 apostrophe or 10 feet in real life. So I'll type in 10 apostrophe and hit return. You will see the image of the model scales down a little bit. If it's off screen slightly, make sure you don't orbit, but make sure you pan. So with the orbit tool active right here, hold down shift to activate the pan tool, and you can drag this model over so that it's centered on the screen. So I'll move it over to here and then let go. I'll finish by clicking print to PDF. We'll click OK. And now I'll save this as print A somewhere on my computer and then click save. Let's repeat this for print B. So I'll click on the print B tab, go up to file print. I'll set the print to scale, change it to make sure it's 10 feet and hit enter. I can hold down shift and drag this over to make it fit. Be sure not to scroll, because if you scroll, you're going to change the scale in the model. So make sure that stays at 10 feet. And it's okay if there's other stuff in the model, because you're going to be cutting this out anyway. I'll click print to PDF, click OK, and call this print B, and then click save. These are all the steps that we need to take in SketchUp to get us to print. There are a few tips I can give you when you go to print this out to assemble it. One is, if possible, print on a heavier or thicker paper. It'll just make it much more rigid and stiff versus thinner copy paper. If you only have copy paper, that's okay. You could even double it up or spray mount it together on another piece of paper to thicken it up, should you find the model to be pretty flexible or flimsy. The other tip is make sure you're printing out at 100%. So just check your printer settings as you go to file print and make sure you're printing to actual size. Some programs tend to crop the margin of the paper and shrink the image down. This will affect the final scale if you were to take a ruler and measure it. Also, print a couple copies. Just having a few extra doesn't hurt. So in addition to having the printouts, a pair of scissors are handy, some glue, some tape, and later when we get to scoring, sometimes a pencil or even a pen to score along an edge is helpful. That really just depends on what you're using to cut as well. So our first step in assembling is to just cut around the perimeter of each printout. So let's just quickly do that. So I'm just going to take my scissors and begin cutting around those particular points. And I'll speed up this video, that way you're not watching me just cut around every part of the model. It's okay at points like this where you're at the tabs to just kind of extend and then go back later and just cut out this little sliver right there and right there. So work your way around the model, being careful not to cut a surface that you need. Sometimes too, it's helpful just to cut off the paper. That way you have less material to work with. Makes it easier when you're beginning to work around the more complicated areas of the model. So again, I'm just going to work my way around the model here, making the cuts as they are. Move on to the next one and just repeat the process. Also, it's important to note, if you're unsure if you need a tab or not, don't be afraid to cut an extra one. Maybe you forgot it, or maybe you didn't draw the tabs yet. You can kind of draw a perimeter around it. And then that way, when you go to assemble this, you can later cut those off if necessary. It's always better to have more and then remove them later versus cutting it off and not having that option later. Now that we have our two pieces cut away, let's go in and focus on some of the tabs and see how we can clean those up. So I didn't do a particularly well job cutting some of the edge here. So I'm going to go back through, and one little tip that you can do that actually helps when adjoining these is actually mitering the tabs themselves. So if you look here, this is a straight cut. What I'll do is I'll come in at a 45-degree angle to that cut. And I'll do the same thing over here. Come in at 45 and just cut that tab off. That's going to make it easier to transition and fold and seam the next two pieces. It's something you probably could have drawn in SketchUp as part of the tab, but quite honestly, it's a lot of extra work to miter and draw the angles of those tabs when it's just as easy just to cut those once you have the model built up. So I know I have the tabs here, which is okay. So I'm going to cut these away. And I'll clean up the tabs on this one as well. Clean up this little area right here and this little cut here just to make that tab a little bit nicer. And if you want to angle and miter these tabs, you can as well. Again, mitering is just going to make it easier when you go to assemble this. I'll do this last one here. And I think I got all of them. Now with the cuts all done, here comes the tricky part in working with the tabs. We want to make sure we begin to start fold all the tab pieces and make those as nice creased items. The challenge is, depending on how big the printout and how big your hands are, it's very difficult to literally just fold a tiny little tab here. So my hands are really a little bit too big for this. So what works much better is to pre-score along the edges of each fold. This will create a nice crease that you can then do. A couple ways that you can do that. You can take the scissors, don't cut the paper, but just take it and just do a little kind of score line. Now you also need to be careful with scissors because it can actually begin to score and cut off some of the paper. So even taking a pen sometimes and just going really hard along that edge can score it. Or just don't use the sharp part of the blade, maybe use the back end of it just to kind of score an edge. It doesn't have to be much. You'll get a feel for how much of a score that you need. And it doesn't have to be perfect. So, take your time going through and scoring these edges. It's just going to make it a little bit easier for us when we go to assemble. So again, I'm trying to use, if you look at my scissors, I'm actually using the left sort of edge here on it as my scoring. That seems to be working pretty good. And this is also why we may have a couple extra printouts, because if you ruin a side of this, you kind of have to redo the whole piece. So it's best to have a couple extras. Then you'll notice it's easier to start by folding the tabs first. So kind of work your way outward. So I'm going to work with this tab first. And that's where too, if you want to kind of score it to crease that nice, you can do that. You can also use your thumb. That usually works pretty well. Kind of get that nice crisp corner there. Do the same thing up here. Then we'll do these tabs here. You can actually start to see as I begin to just fold it with my thumb, you can start to see where crease was made. Even here, you can begin to see that little bit. I should just kind of fold pretty nicely for us there. Then let's do the roof. This one, I might go in and truly fold it nice. That way it's got a little bit of that cleanness. Now, if you look at your paper, you kind of want to start to begin aligning it with how it's going to finally settle. And that's where that thicker paper can sometimes be helpful as it starts to take form. If this is really soft, you might want to maybe glue this to something else, maybe another sheet of paper. In a first pass of this, use what you have and then do a dry run. So meaning, just try to assemble it. Figure out how it feels, what connections that you have. And you can see here as I begin to kind of dry assemble this, which is assembling without actually gluing it yet, it's coming together actually pretty nicely. So my creases are pretty good. You want to look for any spots where you're kind of overlapping and seeing some of the other tab or color sort of appear. So I'd want to make sure when I glue this that I have that nice and tight here. That way I'm not seeing any of the tab. You'll have always a little bit of gap on some of these here, like these end edges. Not the end of the world. So let's repeat the process over here. For the other piece, I'll go in and just create my creases and do my crease here and another one here and along the roof and wall edge here. Sometimes it's really easy to forget which one you creased. So I try to do it, in this case, all the horizontal ones first, and then go back and do all the vertical ones. And the side ones here and here. So like the other portion, let's fold our tabs, crease it, and fold the roof and crease it. Fold the wall and fold this little crease here. And then we'll do this tab, and then all the tabs along the sidewall. All right, that's starting to look pretty good. Let's fold the sidewall up, give it some form, and then bring this adjacent wall up. And we'll do, as we did last time, a little bit of a dry fit to see how that's feeling. This one is a little bit trickier because it's a longer roof part of it. So just be careful. I can barely fit my thumb sort of in there. So you might have to be creative, use a different finger to kind of hold that just to start to feel what that edge is going to look like. Now that we have both of our pieces loosely put together, we can begin to assemble these. If you want a really quick assemble and you're doing it just to kind of see what it starts to look like, by all means, tape is a quick option for that. However, I don't like using tape because you're typically going to see it on the outside. There are times within a model that you might tape some of the inside edges if possible, but I find with a model this small, it's just really difficult to work with tape. And that's where sort of all-purpose glue or a glue stick, that works really well here. The biggest challenge really is just having patience to wait for it to dry before you start putting all the pieces together. So we're not going to try to assemble it together as one piece just yet. We're going to assemble each one individually, let it dry, and then put it together. So what I'll do here is I'll just open this up, and using my glue stick, I'll start to put some glue all along each and every tab so that it's nice and tacky. And you may find as you're doing this, you may need to reapply some glue here. You don't need a lot. Certainly other types of glue can work as well. Rubber cement, super glue, whatever you have here. So now as you can feel it being a little tacky, you want to start with that inside corner. So this is probably going to be the easiest part to do. So if I kind of get that nice and set, you can then start to bring up the other side, this side here. And I'm pinching. So I'm trying to really pinch to get these nice and tight and together. Now this is going to be the hardest connection because you have two pieces coming together on here, and then you have the top coming together. So try to first get the piece with the tab and get that nice and tacky to that inside piece. Now you can see here, I have this little bit of tab that I didn't cut or miter. So that's just going to make it a little bit difficult to address. So that tab there, that miter is going to help assemble this all together. And I'm looking to try and get that roof seam to be nice and tight. So I'm really pinching pretty hard underneath here to get that nice and tight. And the good thing about glue sticks is they're really forgiving. They don't dry right away, so you do have a little bit of working time, but you do want to get in there and start to pinch. That way it starts to get that sort of piece together. So that looks pretty good. I got a nice clean seam here. I just have this tab hanging out. I put glue on here, forgot that I'm not going to do that till later, so that's okay. But this piece feels pretty good. I'm going to put it down. That way don't mess it up. And the glue on here is still tacky. So let's go right on in and begin to assemble the next one. And same idea, forgot to that little tab there. That's quite all right. This one, because it is a little bit longer, it may be a little bit trickier to really get your hand to kind of get that crease. So, be resourceful if you have to use a pen or a piece of paper or, something else, a stick, perhaps, something else to really help do that. And even here, I can start to see my crease here isn't as sharp as I wanted it to be. So see how it's kind of bowing a little bit? So I'm going to actually try and fold this and get a little bit more of a crease there. There we go. It's a little too soft in that. I may even need to reapply just a little bit more glue there. And I'm going to use a different grip on this. And then again, just kind of pinching to begin to kind of put those together. If you want to as well, you can kind of put it down on the ground. Use the ground as a way then come back and just kind of pinch along each of those seams there. And it's hard to see, but you can get in and just kind of pinch with it laying flat along into that point. My camera won't be able to view that, but I'm essentially getting into the back edge here and just kind of pressing down. Because you want that glue to be able to contact all parts and all edges of the model there. We'll fast forward a little bit, and now let's say that they're nice and dry. We now need to take the two pieces and now put them together in this particular way here. And that's going to be easier said than done, because right now, as you see in the planning, I only have a tab here and here and here. So I only have tabs on the top. I actually don't have any tabs or connections. So that's okay. Take some extra paper and use your scissors and just create an extra little area of paper, particularly because this is going to be on the bottom. I can essentially kind of tape it so that the two pieces kind of come together across there. Or you could even, do this in a couple phases. Like I have this one tab right here. Let's actually glue that up really, really heavy. And let's let that dry and cure before we begin doing the other pieces. Because at least with it connected here, really then all that matters is this connection over to here. And you'll see I actually I have this tab here. This tab I pulled in. This tab's actually going to go out so that it connects back to there. So we'll let that point right here dry. If I turn that around, you can kind of see that this way. So I'm letting this seam right here dry. And then that way we can come back and glue this piece here. Now with that piece dry, I'm going to reapply some more just so that they're nice and tacky, and then go to position this. Now you'll see it's really difficult to make sure that those are actually connecting. And I could do this one or two ways. I could flip it upside down and just kind of connect the two and sort of glue that so that they're nice and stiff. If I really want to make sure that these inside points are connected, I need to then just kind of be able to see in and cut in here. So what you can do, because we're not going to see the bottom of this, you can essentially just create a little access spot for your finger. So now that I cut off a little piece from the bottom, I can now get my hand in there to actually connect these really, really difficult seams here. And it's really hard to see, so I apologize for the video maybe not being able to see that completely, but I'm pushing my thumb right up against here to make sure that that tab is gluing to that seam, because that's really the best spot and the hardest seam to get here. If you have this nice and glued down, the rest should come into place pretty quickly. So now here I can push down the other side to it right there. Just going to be just let it go. And then let me try to get my finger in on this side right here. So I'm trying to push this side down too. A lot of deep breaths is really helpful here. Patience. And it is very easy to overwork it. So, I'm trying to wedge it. Just kind of take a minute, take a break. I got something stuck on here, a little paper artifact that's now affecting it. But again, just take a deep breath, gently begin to push it together. Focus on maybe 2 tabs and then let it rest. If you need to reassemble it, that's okay. That's kind of the fun of practicing and seeing it all get put together. All right, there you have it. We have our printout of our 3D model. I hope you enjoyed this SketchUp for Schools lesson series, and best of luck creating any of your 3D models and printing them out as physical objects. Happy SketchUpping!